All right, time once again for a meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, before we get started tonight, I want to extend some personal thanks to Jeff Cohen, the co-host of the Baseball and Barbecue podcast, who assisted us in scheduling our presenter this evening. And Jeff, we appreciate you. We're sorry you couldn't be here tonight, but we hope you watch us on the recording when I post on YouTube. So now, here we go. On to our feature presentation. It's not simply that Dot Wilkinson is one of the most decorated women's softball players, bowlers, and athletes of all time, and the only living original player from the three-time world champion PBSW Phoenix Ramblers softball team. Nor is it the length of her time here on Earth, a century and counting, although any of these things by themselves would be impressive. The magic of Dot's story is in the details. It's the tale of a childhood spent in poverty, an indomitable, unbreakable spirit, a determination to be the very best to play whatever sport she undertook, the independence to live her personal life on her own terms, and the tremendous success at all of it. Lynn Ames is the multi-award-winning best-selling author of 16 novels. Out at the plate, the Dot Wilkinson Story, the recently released authorized biography of the greatest women's softball catcher of all time, is Lynn's first work of nonfiction. Prior to becoming a full-time author, Lynn was an award-winning broadcast journalist, a former press secretary to the New York State Senate Minority Leader, and a nationally recognized speaker and public relations professional with an expertise in branding, image, and crisis communications. Lynn Ames. Welcome to Northern New England. How are you this evening?
I am fabulous. Thank you for welcoming me back to what I think is home for me. I went to college in Vermont. I lived in Albany, New York for 23 years. I am a native New Yorker. Northeast is home for me and all my family. Well, most of my family still lives someplace in that region.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Middlebury College, Middlebury, Vermont.
Oh, for heaven's sake, one of our members is a longtime faculty member at Middlebury, Carl Lindholm.
You have Carl Lindholm?
He's a personal friend.
I know Carl.
Oh my gosh. The world gets bigger, it gets smaller. Carl, if you're watching this one's for you tonight, my friend.
This one's for you, Carl. With the greatest New England accent, Carl.
Yes. I'm going to step back. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here. I'm so glad you're here today or tonight in New England. You're in for what I hope is an extra special treat. We're going to take a trip back in time tonight, and I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can stop watching me if you so choose. I would personally, and you can instead watch Dot and learn all about Dot Wilkinson and the real story of women's softball. So I imagine that many of you have seen Penny Marshall's 1992 beloved film, A League of Their Own. The movie recounts the heyday of women's ball in the 1940s. I adored that film. If you're here, I'm certain you did too. I mean, what's not to love is Gina Davis, Madonna, Rosie O'Donnell, Tom Hanks, and one of the most iconic lines in movie history, say it with me, there's no crying in baseball. There's only one problem. While the movie is wildly entertaining and is indeed based on the true story of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, to say the film captures the history of women's ball in that era is, well, a stretch. See what I did there? Which brings me to the protagonist of our story, Dorothy Elsie Wilkinson. Dot, or Dottie to those who knew her, is widely hailed as the greatest catcher ever to play women's ball. Philip K. Wrigley and his associates certainly thought so, which is why in 1943, when Wrigley first conceived of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, he sent his people to Phoenix to try to recruit Dot for his fledgling league. His representatives slid a contract in front of Dot for $85 per week, the maximum salary offered in the league, and a lot of money in 1943. Spoiler alert, despite popular lore that Dot Wilkinson was the Dottie Hinson character played by Gina Davis in the film, the real Dot never played in Wrigley's league. Dot said in more colorful terms than I'll use here, "Thanks, but no thanks." Here's what Dot told me in front of a live audience in 2014 when I asked her about it.
And a lot of those women that you see in the background of that movie, we played against them. They played on different teams, and I played against a lot of those gals. But 2 girls, I think, went here from Phoenix, or 3. Carolyn Morse, I think, went back there, and Skippy Armstrong, and Pauline Crawley. But the rest of us didn't go. There were several on our team that went up to that meeting at the Hotel Westward Ho, and we just didn't go. We didn't want to go. We weren't interested. And a lot of those women that you see in the background of that movie, we played against them. They played on different teams, and I played against a lot of those gals. But 2 girls, I think, went here from Phoenix, or 3. Carolyn Morse, I think, went back there, and Skippy Armstrong, and Pauline Crawley. But the rest of us didn't go. There were several on our team that went up to that meeting at the Hotel Westward Ho, and we just didn't go. We didn't want to go. We weren't interested. And
tell them why you weren't interested, apart from the fact that what did they want you to do?
Well,
those girls had to go to charm school every night. The idea was that they would be made very feminine. They didn't want anyone, God forbid, thinking that these women were what they might have been. So, I mean, they made them dress, like I was talking about.
oh yeah, they had to check in like you're in college or something, you know, and I don't know.
Not for you.
I just wasn't interested in, period, in leaving the Ramblers for main thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I enjoyed the movie. It's a good movie. And it's funny.
But it wasn't your truth.
But it wasn't, everybody thought that gal catching was me because her name was Dot. Well, I've had to answer that question so many times that sometimes I'd say, okay. It was not me, and I didn't have anything to do with it.
Now that Dot and I have told you the truth, you can't unknow it. But don't despair. The real story of Dot Wilkinson and the heyday of women's softball is so much more interesting than that. Let's start at the beginning. Dot was born October 9th, 1921 at home on her parents' farm in Phoenix, Arizona. The Wilkinsons were dirt poor, literally. The farm produced just enough to feed the family and not much beyond that. There was no running water or indoor plumbing, a source of great embarrassment to Dot as soon as she was old enough to realize that all her friends' houses had those luxuries. Still, Dot said she never wanted for anything and didn't feel as though they were poor. She spent most of her spare time running around carefree with the neighbor kids. The game of softball didn't exist before Dot was born. Although the bare bones of the game came into existence in 1887 in Chicago, it wasn't until 1926 that Walter Hackinson of the YMCA coined a name for the game that stuck. And no formal uniform rules for the game existed before the establishment of the Amateur Softball Association, the ASA, in January 1934. So when 11-year-old Dot Wilkinson stepped out onto the playground at Roosevelt Elementary School on a clear, sunny day in the fall of 1932 to participate in a track and field competition, she had no idea that fate and circumstance were about to shape the rest of her life. One of the competitions that day required the kids to throw a baseball as far as they could. Dot stepped up and let the ball fly. The supervising teacher, Ford Hoffman, took notice. He pulled Dot aside and asked her, "How would you like to someday play on a team that goes to the World Championships in Chicago?" Dot had no idea where Chicago was, but if it meant she could play ball, she was all in. That was the moment. Ford cobbled together a girls' team, named them the Phoenix Ramblers, and went about securing a sponsor to provide uniforms, gloves, cleats, balls, and bats. Peterson, Brook, Steiner, and Wist, a local school supply store, stepped up to the plate. PBSW became the Phoenix Ramblers' only sponsor throughout the team's 33-year run, making the company the only entity to sponsor a single team for its entire existence. The team played its first official game in 1933. Dot began that premier season as Batgirl, but within very short order, she took over at second base. That is Dot, bottom left of your screen, the little scrawny thing. And this is where I insert a fun bit of trivia. Dot was a natural righty, but she batted left-handed her entire career. She didn't switch hit, she batted only left-handed. When I asked her why that was, she said it was the way Ford had taught her at the very outset. I was just a little thing, she said. He told me that if I could hit from that side of the plate, it would give me a huge advantage getting up the line to first base. I can tell you with complete confidence that Ford was the only person in Dot's life whose guidance and advice she would follow without question. As obstinate and stubborn as Dot was, she trusted Ford above all else. For the first 3 years, 1933 through 1935, the Ramblers played only within the 4-team local league that Ford and a few associates had put together. That's her right in the front, squatting down. But Ford dreamed of expansion. In 1936, he began taking the Ramblers on road trips to compete in places like California and Utah, where similar leagues and teams were beginning to pop up. Also in 1936, a Phoenix businessman and men's softball player named Larry Walker started gathering together all the female softball talent he could find, with the aim of competing against the Ramblers and all other comers. He named his team the Queens, and thus began one of the most storied, intense rivalries in softball history. Walker's self-professed aim was to draw crowds with sex appeal, in addition to excellence on the ball field. He vehemently denied, as one magazine at the time posited, that strenuous athletics were detrimental to femininity, and that the best female athletes were somewhat masculine in appearance, which naturally was code for lesbian. Ford and Larry Walker, both equally competitive, could not have been more different in style and approach. Where Ford prided himself on building a team solely on homegrown talent and based on ability, Walker, well, this will give you an idea of his approach to amassing a team. We pass them up, Walker declared in an oblique reference to these masculine-type girls. It is possible to be an athlete and maintain feminine charm. Walker outfitted the girls in short satin skirts over brief tights. Queens players, according to Walker, were chosen on the basis of character first, feminine charm second, and ability to play ball third. Our team is based on good-looking girls. Even though it's one of the top girls' teams in the world, it could draw very well if we won only very few games. Dot shared her thoughts about Larry Walker with a bitter laugh. He was far from her favorite person. If only he knew how many of his players were gay. Then she'd shrug, seemingly unbothered by the homophobic and sexist attitude. That's just the way it was back then. Over the years, the Queens had a variety of sponsors, but to the Ramblers and their fans, they forever would be simply the Queens. The intense rivalry between the two teams lasted for decades. Dot was friends with many of the Queens, but once they took the field, personal friendship counted for nothing.
Let's talk about Flossie.
Oh, poor little Flossie.
Poor little Flossie. Flossie Ballard played for the A1 Queens, yeah?
She played first base for the A1 Queens. And their coach told their players, don't ever slide into Wilkinson at home plate because she blocks the plate. Just knock her down when you come in. So that game, about 6 people had already knocked me down. So here comes Flossie in, and she knocks me down. So I got up and knocked her down. and they didn't even, the umpires, old Art Van Haren was our umpire, and he just said, okay, ladies, that's enough. And Flossie went that way, and I went that way, and that was it. They didn't kick either one of us out. But I did. She was my best friend up until she just died a year ago. And we bowled together and everything ever since. She always reminded me of that.
There's Flossie in her heyday. And by the way, her sons reached out to me after I wrote this book. And they were so thrilled to find their mom in my book. The enmity extended far beyond the players to the fans as well. Loyalties were fierce. If you were a Ramblers fan, you sat in the Ramblers section, Dot said. If you were a Queens fan, you sat in the Queens section. You never fraternized with the enemy. You wouldn't believe how many times a fight in the stands had to be broken up.
The lady that worked next door to me when I worked in the real estate office down on East Van Buren, they got in a fight up there, and they were hitting each other with their purses, and just everything was happening. So they got serious.
Trust me when I tell you, this was far from the only tussle on or off the field between the Ramblers and the Queens. In 1937, Ford made good on his promise. That season, with 15-year-old Dot playing short field, the Ramblers went 33-1 in the regular season. They swept the Arizona State Championship and qualified for the World Softball Championships in Chicago.
It was at Chicago in Soldiers Field, which is still there. But there was 20 men's teams and 20 women's teams all lined up in the basement of Soldier Field. And I guess I was 12 years old then, as I look back to see, because I remember going, but, you know, don't remember that. And then I thought, I was looking at a scrapbook when my sister started, because she started playing with us. And she had this book that was written when she was in high school, which she was 4 years older than me. And it had a box score in it. And I thought, well, I'm going to look and see if I really did play. So I looked, and here I was, leading off, D. Wilkinson. 4 times a bat and 1 hit. I'm 12 years old and I'm playing with the big girls in Chicago. It was something to me.
At that first tournament, the Ramblers acquitted themselves well, finishing 3rd. But Dot wasn't satisfied. After all, her team had lost. By the time the next spring rolled around, women's competitive softball was starting to take off in popularity. The Ramblers practiced under the lights at University Park in Phoenix and traveled often on weekends for away games.
Being on the road was not the easiest thing. We drove in cars that didn't have any air conditioning in them, back and forth between here in California and here in Fresno and up in Oregon and all over. And we stayed in flea bag motels or wherever we could find to get a place. Way back then, there weren't very many motels. So you had a hard time finding a place to live or stay all night or whatever. So we did a lot of driving at night. And we did a lot of traveling, and you just do nothing. You just go into a motel, and you go out to eat at a certain time in the afternoon, you play ball, and you go home, and that's it. It's not all those glorified good times that people think you had. And then so many nights we drove all night to get home so we could go to work the next day. And that wasn't easy, but I wouldn't trade any of it. It was fun. Now I think back and it's fun. Then it wasn't too much fun.
It was during the state championship series in 1938 that fate really took Dot by the hand. The Ramblers' regular catcher, Norma Acuff, suffered a season-ending injury. Ford didn't hesitate. He turned to 16-year-old Dot and handed her the catcher's mitt, or the round donut, as Dot called it. Dot recalled in a 1999 article in the Arizona Republic newspaper, "I got back there the first time and I caught. I didn't have anything but a glove, and they let you do that. I didn't have a mask or a chest protector." The moment she squatted behind home plate for the first time, at just 16 years old, Dot became the field manager for the Ramblers, their permanent catcher, and in short order, the greatest catcher ever to play women's softball. By the way, Dot's freedom not to wear a mask and a chest protector, that was short-lived. Just before the World Championships that year, 1938, the ASA changed the rules to require that catchers wear both a mask and a chest protector.
Now, you did something interesting with your chest protector, didn't you?
Well, they made me wear one, so I just cut the insides out of it.
Fat lot of good that did you.
Well, I figured I don't need a chest protector. I got a glove. I catch it.
Now, your glove was a little different than most catchers' gloves that you see. You did something different. Tell them what you did and why you did it.
My glove? I didn't do anything. It's just
Five-finger glove.
just a finger glove.
Yeah, your 5
I used a finger glove because of a rise ball pitcher we had. She kept throwing it over my head, so it's kind of hard to catch him with that little donut. So I started using a finger glove. That chest protector, it's in the National Hall of Fame because it's a laugh. I just got a small one, and I cut it all the way around and took all the padding out of it. And it was just like a piece of cloth. But it was legal. They said I had to wear it, so.
So you did.
So I did.
Letter of the law, intent of the law.
And I never got hit in the chest, for crying out loud. You're supposed to catch the ball.
That's the name of the game. So that's why they call it a catcher. Yeah.
Foul tips. If it's here, you catch it. If it goes over here, you let it hit the umpire.
Once again, the Ramblers fell in the semifinals and returned home empty-handed in 1938. By the way, getting to these tournaments was not cheap. Ford raised the money for gas and motels by arranging for the Ramblers to play exhibition games. In this instance, the Ramblers traveled to New York City to play 2 night games against the New York Roverettes in the historic Madison Square Garden. Oh yes, you heard me right. This newspaper clipping was the very first thing I saw the second time I met Dot and she showed me her scrapbook. That's Dot squatting second from left. She and her Rambler teammates are wearing cowboy hats, and that's the world-famous Rockettes perched on the roof of Radio City Music Hall with them. You can see why I was entranced. On those 2 nights, the Ramblers and the Roverettes played in sneakers on a terrazzo floor before the largest crowds ever to see an indoor softball game. 12,500 fans the first night and 13,500 the second night. Let that sink in for a minute. A pair of women's softball games drew 26,000 fans in Madison Square Garden in 1938. 1938, as it turned out, was a watershed year for women's softball. The 1938 World Championships boasted 34 women's teams from 43 states. 200,000 spectators had attended the 3-day single elimination affair. The nascent beginning of the heyday of women's softball had begun. For 25 cents per person, a family could come to the ballpark and be well entertained. In fact, the women's games were so popular that when they played double headers with the men's teams, the women got top billing. The Ramblers and the Queens consistently played to sold-out stadiums. And Phoenix wasn't the only place in which softball was taking off. By the late 1930s, Southern California was a hotbed of diamond talent. Some of the girls and young women who got their start in these leagues included future Hall of Famers Kay Rich, Bertha Reagan Tickey, Teddy Hamilton, Louise Embry, Snooky Doyle, Willie Turner, and Estelle Ricky Cato. One of those California teams, sponsored by Bank of America, featured a lithesome pitcher infielder named Kay Rohr. Young Kay was under contract to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer at the time, and she was set to star in her first big picture. When she broke her wrist playing softball, the studio had to postpone shooting, enraging the brass. They gave her an ultimatum: be a movie star or a softball player, but you cannot be both. Kay quit Hollywood and chose the diamond instead. By 1940, war had broken out in Europe and the world was on edge. Here at home in the United States, softball provided a welcome distraction and wholesome entertainment. The Ramblers, having come so close to the pinnacle of the sport the previous 3 years, finally fully hit their stride. That year, for the first time, the World Championships were slated for someplace other than Chicago. In this case, the venue was Detroit. In the end, the Ramblers destroyed Cleveland 10-3 in the most one-sided championship game ever played. At last, the Ramblers were world champions. More than 70 years later, Dot still called it the greatest day and year of her life. The city of Phoenix, which never had had a world champion in any sport before, rolled out the red carpet for the victorious Ramblers. The celebration began with a ticker tape parade through the city, during which players rode in convertibles, that's Dot, and waved to the crowd as they traveled the route from Central Avenue and McDowell Road and ending at City Hall. The parade was followed by a ceremony at City Hall presided over by the governor and the Phoenix mayor. The next night, the team was honored with a banquet at the Hotel Westward Ho, attended by more than 200 people. The Ramblers were on top of the world. But it was a changing world. In February 1941, 10 months before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and the U.S. was thrust into World War II, Goodyear opened a plant on the west side of town. Dot, who had completed 1 year of junior college and vowed to Ford that she would not go back to school for a second year, went to work supporting the burgeoning war effort. Dot, her first girlfriend, Kathleen Peanuts Eldridge, and their teammate Margie Law, along with Dot's friend from the rival Queens, Flossie Ballard, found jobs in the new Goodyear factory producing airplane parts. Yes, Dot was a Rosie the Riveter. She ran the drill press. Her preferred style of dress, jeans, fit in with factory attire during the war. She was making real money for the very first time. She was having fun with her tight-knit group of friends, and she was free to be who she was. The Arizona Republic, the Phoenix-based newspaper, printed a massive team practice photo of the Ramblers in its Sunday sports section. The caption partially read, "Winner up to yesterday of all but one of their 35 games this year, the PBSW Ramblers of Phoenix, greatest feminine softball team Arizona has ever produced, are heading down the home stretch toward defense of their world championship 6 weeks hence in Detroit." That single loss was to the Ramblers' arch rivals, the Queens. Subsequently, the Ramblers took the other 2 games of that 3-game series. Later on, that caption says, "Crouched behind the bat is Dot Wilkinson, undoubtedly the nation's outstanding feminine softball catcher and a top-notch slugger with a current .446 average." If Dot was fazed at the time by the enhanced scrutiny, the publicity, and the expectations, she didn't show it. As always, she was singularly focused on one thing: winning. And so it came as a massive blow when, in front of a crowd of 18,000 fans in University of Detroit Stadium, the Ramblers were sent packing in the first round of the 1941 World Softball Championships by the up-and-coming New Orleans Jacks. The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor several months after the end of that disappointing 1941 softball season. Still, not much else changed about Dot's life except her girlfriend. Dot moves on from Peanuts to Virginia Dobby Dobson, a new recruit to the Ramblers. Other than that, Dot remained fully focused on softball. Going into the 1942 season, the Queens, who had taken the 1941 Arizona State Championship by virtue of a Ramblers exception from that tournament, showed no inclination to give it back to their crosstown rivals. Across the country, softball boomed. Families, friends, old and young, working class and affluent, filled ballparks, hungry to watch the women play. Games between the Ramblers and the Queens sold out. Dot continued to be heckled by Queens fans, and she continued to give as good as she got.
I want to talk about the guy who was heckling you behind home plate, the guy you followed a long way, someplace you shouldn't have gone. Tell them the story. You know the story I'm talking about, right?
He razzed me all through that game. And I told him, I said, when this game is over, you better get out of here, because I'm coming after you. Well, he just kept on, and after the game was over, well, I started out after him, and he ran in the men's room, and I went right after him. I kept right on going, and that was when I was very young. I had my little fat glove, and I popped him across and walked out of the men's room.
By 1942, the New Orleans Jacks were on the cusp of building a dynasty to challenge that of the Ramblers. Between them, those 2 teams ruled the diamond in the 1940s. The Jacks, with the formidable Savona sisters, Olympia and Freda, and the unhittable Nina Corrigan, would claim the World Championship 5 times that decade. The Ramblers would walk away with the World Championship trophy 3 times. That decade, the 1940s, in many ways proved to be the most turbulent and transformative 10 years in women's softball history. This was especially true of the middle years, 1943 through 1947. These were also the years that most shaped Dot's career and her reputation. As she entered her early 20s and came into her own, Dot was beginning to get a reputation as a hothead. It was well-deserved. Newspaper accounts spoke of her ferocity and grit. Players, umpires, and fans who were on the receiving end of Dot's fire and ire might have described her temper in more colorful terms. Even by Dot's own account, she wasn't someone to trifle with.
I had a couple of instances, and one of them was this lady kept bugging us, and she was sitting right behind our dugout, and there was a water fountain right there. And she kept bugging us and bugging us and bugging us, and she said, "You shouldn't even be playing out there. You're from the wrong side of town," South Phoenix. I put my thumb on that faucet. And she's sitting in the box seats, and I just soaked her.
Queens catcher Lois Williams, pictured here with Dot, also had her share of run-ins at the plate with Dot. I remember one Queens Ramblers game in 1943 when Dot had just sent Arnone Thomas flying when she tried to score. I was boiling mad about that, and I made up my mind to run over her when I came in from third. I came roaring in a minute later, but Dot just dropped her shoulder at the last second, and I went head over heels. I was out, too. She got me plenty of times, though. Once she barreled into home with her head down and broke my hand. But do you know who was the first one to the hospital to see how I was? Dot Wilkinson. And then there was this.
I'll tell you one instance I remember in Fresno, California. We used to always play, instead of playing 7 innings, We were playing 9 up there in Fresno. So we had this big argument in the 7th inning. And I thought the game was over. And I went out and I grabbed that umpire at second, out by the second base, and I grabbed him by the shirt and shook him and said, and the game was still on. I thought the game was over. Well, it was for you. It was for me.
What was it? What were you mad about?
Oh, I don't know, some stupid call he made or something, I guess.
What'd you tell him? You remember what you told him?
I don't remember what I said. I remember grabbing him by the shirt right here and shaking him.
Did you get fined? Well, it's a good thing.
No, they didn't.
You get to
They kind of liked it because it brought more people to this park. Another 50-cent admission tomorrow night.
Dot wasn't only a hothead on the field, she was strong-willed off the field as well. In November 1942, she, Peanuts, and a few others decided they didn't like the way Goodyear was treating them. Dot believed they were being underpaid compared to the men whom they were training. Dot and Peanuts decided to organize a walkout over equal pay. We got high on our rooster or whatever and decided that the women were taking the bad part of the deal. Goodyear was hiring guys in there for more money than we were making, and we were having to teach them. So we were going to go to bat against them. All the girls, there were about 18 of them there that all worked in that department, drill press and all those kinds of men's jobs. I worked on a big press thing and different things, and we all decided we're going to tell them they're either going to have to pay us more or make the guys learn from somebody else. When we got down to the nitty-gritty, well, the only ones who quit were me, Margaret Thrift, and Peanuts. The 3 of us walked out. The rest of them stayed working there. Now cast out of Goodyear, the 3 women needed jobs. Arizona and Phoenix in particular were becoming home to a variety of military-related manufacturing operations. Defense contractor Garrett Air Research had just finished building a brand new plant on the backside of Sky Harbor Airport. Timing favored Dot and her friends. Had the war not created extraordinary opportunities for women to step into traditionally male jobs, it's hard to say what Dot might have done for money. As it was, Dot, Margaret Thrift, and Peanuts were in luck. All 3 of us went over to Air Research and we got hired on there. Dot and Peanuts continued working at Air Research Defense Plant for the remainder of the war, but the terms of employment were challenging to Dot's softball career.
When we work for Air Research, or when we tell them, well, we're not going to be here tomorrow or the next day, well, you got fired. They wouldn't let you give you a couple of days or anything. You just lost your, whatever it was, all your time. But then on Monday morning when we came back, we just walk in the door and go back to work. But you're just rehiring all over again. Nobody would give you the time off to go and play ball. And it was, that's the way it was. It wasn't easy, but we did it. I would have done it. I wouldn't care if I ever got a job back. I'm going to go play ball.
The truth, however, was a little more complicated. While Dot only wanted to play ball, as I told you at the outset, she didn't want to play for just any team. At the close of 1942, a group pulled together by the Chicago Cubs owner Philip Wrigley came up with a plan to fill the hole left by so many male baseball players going off to fight the war. Wrigley and his associates recognized the growing popularity of women's softball and dreamed up a brand new hybrid model of ball to be played in a new league they would form in the Midwest. At first, Wrigley called the league the All-American Girls Professional Softball League. But before the 1943 season was halfway over, he would rename it to the more familiar All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, made famous in the 1992 Penny Marshall Instant Classic, A League of Their Own. Over the course of several years, the size of the ball decreased from the regulation softball, 12 inches in circumference in 1943, to the size of a men's Major League Baseball, 9¼ inches in the early 1950s. Also, by 1950, the pitchers in this new league were required to pitch overhand from 50 feet instead of underhand from 40 feet. Wrigley's first order of business was to recruit the best female players he could find to fill out the league's initial 4 teams. Spring training was set to get underway May 17, 1943, so there was no time to waste. I'm not sure if you noticed it, but the date on that letter I showed you at the beginning of this lecture was April 18, 1943. Here, look at it again. Note that the letter requires Dot to reply by May 5th. Note also the condescending tone throughout. I feel very definitely that you girls are making a mistake. While we are very sincere in wanting you to, in today's language, we'd call that mansplaining, as if Dot doesn't know what she's doing and needs this guy to explain it to her for her own good. In any event, as we now know, a few of Dot's teammates and friends accepted Wrigley's offer, and they did turn pro. For those who did and later regretted their choice or simply changed their minds, they would have to sit out 1 year to regain their amateur status and play again in an Amateur Softball Association sanctioned league. In the meantime, the amateur leagues continued to thrive, and the sport continued to gain in popularity, both on the fields and in the stands. As for Dot and the Ramblers, like most men of his age at the time, Ford had been drafted into service. In December 1942, he reported to the Navy. Although he never shipped overseas, Ford was absent for most of the seasons between 1943 and 1945. He left Dot in charge of the Ramblers, joining them only when he was on leave, when he could arrange it, especially around tournament time. This issue of a new professional league forming in Chicago was one of the first major challenges Dot faced as a manager without Ford's guidance. In 1944, that challenge deepened with the creation of another Chicago-based professional league, the National Girls Baseball League, originally called the National Girls Softball League. This league was backed by Emory Perici, a Chicago area contractor, along with National Football League franchise owner Charles Bidwell and politician Ed Kolsky. Like the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, the National Girls Baseball League rated all of the top amateur teams, as well as its crosstown rival Professional League for talent. Dot herself was once again recruited, albeit unsuccessfully, to play professional ball in Chicago. Some of the biggest name stars who did cross over to the newest league included previous World Softball Championship winners Sophie Kurz and Freda Savona, as well as past and future PBSW Ramblers Ricky Cato, Kay Rohr, and Charlotte Skipper Armstrong. Take a look at this rare footage of Ricky playing for Perici Brothers and Kay catching for the Chicago Bluebirds of the National Girls Baseball League. So that's Ricky on the left, Kay putting on the catcher gear on the right. This is some great footage that I was able to dig up from an archive. These were some of the propaganda films that they showed you back in the day. Really rare. That's Ricky at shortstop right there on the left. Kay in the dugout second from the left there. And by the way, Ricky and Kay were a couple at the time. Meanwhile, the red-hot rivalry between Dot and the Ramblers and Larry Walker's Queens team sizzled in the bright Arizona sunshine, firmly establishing Phoenix as the softball capital of the world. Ford Hoffman, discharged from the Navy at the end of World War II, arrived home on October 5, 1945, 4 days before Dot's 24th birthday, and resumed his position at the helm of the Ramblers. Still, Dot would continue to play a major role in managing the Ramblers. Ford was determined to educate Dot on the business side of softball. In February 1946, Ford took Dot and Dobby with him to Fresno to a meeting with the managers of the Salt Lake City Shamrocks, the Buena Park Lynx, the Queens, the Fresno Rockets, and the Lind and Pomeroy Portland Florists. The meeting produced a brand new regional softball league, the ASA member Western States Girls Majors Softball League, later called the Pacific Coast League. The Ramblers won the inaugural regular season of that new league quite convincingly. The Ramblers and the Queens squared off in mid-August in the state finals. For the second consecutive year, the Queens walked away with the Arizona title 4-2. The Ramblers, stinging from that defeat at the hands of the Queens, went on to compete in the broader Southern Pacific Regional Championships, where they met and trounced the Buena Park Lynx. Dot and her teammates had a hard time concentrating on the field, however. Queens manager Larry Walker had protested the Ramblers' eligibility to play in that regional tournament since they had lost to the Queens on the state level. The protest went all the way to the National Governing Board of the Amateur Softball Association, and for days, Dot and company waited to see if they would be going to Cleveland along with the Queens, who already had qualified. Finally, 1 week before the World Championships were set to get underway, the ASA released its ruling. A cable addressed to the sports editor of the Arizona Republic newspaper read, "Phoenix Ramblers declared ineligible by World's Championship Committee." There it was. Dot vacillated wildly from being mad at the world to being inconsolable. But that wasn't the end of the story for 1946. A second telegram followed, addressed from M.J. Pauley, executive secretary of the ASA, disqualifying the Queens for over-traveling during the 1946 regular season. The newspaper interviewed Ford, trying to unearth who had made the anonymous complaint against the Queens. Dot insisted she had no direct knowledge of who lodged the complaint against Walker and the Queens in 1946, but the glint in her eye made clear that she believes Ford, in his role as manager of the Ramblers, had a hand in it. Sometimes a little revenge can take the sting out of a bitter disappointment. The fallout from the debacle of 1946 was swift and far-reaching. Larry Walker of the Queens was so incensed that he pulled them out of the Amateur Softball Association altogether and created a rival organization, the National Softball Congress, the NSC. The Amateur Softball Association retaliated by informing its participating teams, including the Ramblers, that they would lose their amateur standing and be disqualified if they so much as scheduled a game with a professional team, i.e. like those belonging to the National Softball Congress. Of course, the ASA's stance meant that the crosstown rivalry between the Ramblers and the Queens, an entertaining show that brought thousands of fans through the turnstiles for every game, was on ice. Every entreaty the Ramblers made to the ASA fell on deaf ears. So the Queens and Ramblers spent the 1947 season resentfully eyeing one another from a distance because the ASA and the National Softball Congress weren't on speaking terms. For Dot personally, the consequences of all this tumult were earth-shaking. Before the start of the 1947 season, Ford sent a letter to Ralph Peterson, president of the Ramblers' sponsor, informing him that he would be stepping away from the Ramblers for the 1947 season. At 25, in her 15th year with the Ramblers and the only remaining stalwart from the original team, Ford left Dot fully in charge. Dot worked hard to put together a schedule that would generate fan interest. The Fresno Rockets, powered by infield sensation Kay Rich and with a solid team, were angling to challenge the Ramblers for the Regional League crown. The former world champion Lyndon Pomeroy Flores from Portland, Oregon, were itching to make it all the way back to the top as well. Buena Park, Salt Lake City, and a team from Van Nuys rounded out the Regional League opposition. But Dot knew without a doubt that she needed to bring a bigger headliner. She needed the kind of big-time rivalry that would satisfy the town's lust for softball excellence and fierce competition. She needed the reigning world champion New Orleans Jacks. Freda Savona, the shrewd player-manager of the Jacks, was happy to accommodate. The Ramblers and the Jacks set up multiple series to take place throughout the year and put on a show. They did. One time, Dot recounted, I got into it with the gal from the Jacks, Freda Savona, down at Phoenix Municipal Stadium. She came charging up to me with a bat. I wasn't mad. I thought she was. I didn't have any idea that was put up by the Jacks to gin up the crowd because I know I was never involved in anything that was put up. If I got mad, I was mad for a reason. I didn't know she was putting on a show. I didn't find that out until a long time later. In the 1947 World Championships, after 6 games, 51 innings, the most played by any team in the tournament, Dot and company found themselves in the finals. Unsurprisingly, the team in the opposing dugout was the New Orleans Jacks. 3 times the Ramblers had the lead, 3 times they gave it away. The Jacks emerged victorious 6-4. For the 5th time in their history and the 3rd year in a row, the Jacks were the champions. Dot accepted the runners-up trophy for the Ramblers, conceding that the Jacks had played a better game again. The next day, the Jacks announced their intention to play a 10-game World Series in Phoenix against the Queens, who had nabbed the rival National Softball Congress World Championship. The executive committee of the ASA voted to rescind the World Championship from the Jacks, arguing that by even scheduling games against a National Softball Congress team, the Jacks had turned professional. The ASA vacated the Jacks title and awarded it to the Ramblers, making them the 1947 champions by default. The Jacks responded by pulling out of the Amateur Softball Association and joining the National Softball Congress. They went on to hold their series with the Queens. Dot was glum. We didn't earn it. We didn't want the trophy that way. We didn't feel like champions. The Jacks won fair and square, and they were amateurs at the time we played the game. It would be years before the ASA would reverse itself and reinstate the Jacks as the 1947 world champions. The bad blood continued into the new year. The ASA knew it had to do something or risk losing more quality teams. Prior to the start of the 1948 season, the ASA figured out a workaround. Amateur teams, read that the Ramblers, could play professional teams, read that the Queens, but only within a separate closed league that had nothing to do with either the ASA or the National Softball Congress. A separate, unaffiliated league would be formed in Phoenix, featuring competition between the Ramblers, the Queens, and a team led by former Ramblers pitcher Louise Curtis, the Maids. The headline in the local newspaper, the Arizona Republic, as you can see, exclaimed, "City softball truce is told." A city champion would be crowned at the end of the season. The Ramblers still would be prohibited from playing any professional team from outside that closed loop, including the Jacks, but the rivalry between the Ramblers and the Queens would be alive and well and played in front of rabid fans of both teams in a state-of-the-art stadium. Ford decided to officially return to the Ramblers to resume his management of the team's affairs off the field, but he left Dot in charge of everything that happened between the foul lines. The Queens went on a shopping spree, recruiting every professional player they could get their hands on. They brought back Charlotte Skipper Armstrong, one-time Rambler and former Queens pitcher. Walker also lured in a couple from Chicago, Estelle Ricky Cato, lately a Perici Bloomer Girls from the National Girls Baseball League, and Kay Rohr, formerly of the Rockford Peaches and the Chicago Bluebirds. On September 8, 1948, the Ramblers took off for Portland, Oregon for the 1948 ASA World Championships. Dot still had a bitter taste in her mouth from the 1947 ASA fiasco. For a year, everyone had been referring to the Ramblers as the de facto champions. She badly wanted to win the championship fair and square and get rid of the asterisk next to the Ramblers championship designation. After a 3-game titanic clash with the Lyndon Pomeroy team from Portland, Dot got her wish. Finally, after an 8-year drought, the Ramblers once again were the rightful world champions. Dot received All-American honors and another trophy to add to her burgeoning collection. By the start of the 1949 softball season, Dot's star had fully risen in the softball world. Newspapers and magazines ran large-scale features on her. Arizona Highways magazine ran a front-page story titled Arizona's Larraping Lassies, a full-cover, 12-page comprehensive examination of the women's softball scene in Phoenix, the stars of the game, and the 3 major hometown teams, the Ramblers, the Queens, and the Maids. Fans flocked to fill the stadiums to catch the action. Once again, despite stiffening competition, the Ramblers emerged atop the regional league. In September, the Ramblers headed to Portland, Oregon to defend their championship title. The Girls Softball World Championship in 1949 was held separately from the men's tournament for the very first time, a testament to the fact that the women were a big enough draw on their own. For the second consecutive year, the Ramblers defeated Portland to win the championship. It was their 3rd win of the decade, and unbeknownst to Dot at the time, it was the last world championship the Ramblers would ever win. It wasn't so much that the Ramblers faded from glory. They continued to be among the top 3 or 4 teams in the country. It was more that several other teams' stars began to rise. In the early 1950s, 2 California teams annexed some remarkably talented players that lifted them to the top of the amateur softball world. The Orange Lionettes boasted multiple future Hall of Fame players like pitching sensation Bertha Reagan, perhaps the most dominant pitcher of her day, Carol Spanks, Nancy Ito, Shirley Topley, and the fierce Ricky Cato. I say fierce. On the ground there in front of you, that's Ricky getting her hand stepped on by that cleat in a fight against the Whittier Gold Sox. Boy, did she have a temper. The Fresno Rockets featured future Hall of Fame pitcher Ginny Busick and perhaps the best all-around player of that time period, the versatile Kay Rich. These 2 California powerhouses accounted for 8 of the 9 world championships in the 1950s. The Lionettes were 5-time champions. The Rockets took home the trophy 3 times. To be sure, the Ramblers weren't standing still. In the early 1950s, Ford, Dot, and the Ramblers made several key acquisitions. First, Ford discovered young Billy Harris, who'd been playing recreational ball in Tucson. That's Billy standing next to Ford. While a scattering of all-black teams existed, never had there been a black player on an ASA-sanctioned women's softball team. In 1948, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League had admitted 3 Cuban players, but black players were still excluded. Billy began playing for the Ramblers in 1950, although she didn't pitch her first game until 1954. Like Jackie Robinson, Billy endured racism, threats, and discrimination. She became one of the game's greatest pitchers and the first African American of either gender inducted into the National Softball Hall of Fame. In 1954, Kay Rohr, the ex-movie star, joined the Ramblers. In 1955, according to Dot, Dot's girlfriend Dobby jilted Dot and eloped with a guy she'd been dating to placate her parents. Kay, who'd broken up with Ricky years earlier, claimed Dot as her girlfriend and they moved in together. Kay, who had beaten breast cancer once, suffered a reoccurrence in her other breast shortly after she and Dot became an item. Kay continued to play for the team until her death from breast cancer in 1962. She was 39 when she passed away. It's also worth mentioning that by 1957, Dot fully took over managerial duties for the Ramblers with Ford's retirement. 3 times in the 1950s, the Ramblers were runners-up for the World Championship. As Mary Littlewood writes in The Path to the Gold, the Phoenix Ramblers, although they were not successful in dethroning either the Lionettes or the Rockets, were consistently in the running right up until the final tournament games. It was common to see a newspaper headline that read Fresno, Orange, and Phoenix in finals. On an individual playing level, Dot continued to excel. In the 1950s, her batting average and fielding percentages were among the best in the game. She continued to rack up more All-American honors, with 19 such designations. She is the most honored All-American softball player of all time, and she always will be. 1958 saw the rise in ascendancy and dominance of the Rebestos Breakettes of Stratford, Connecticut. In 1956, the Breakettes had lured ace pitcher Bertha Reagan-Ticky away from the Orange Lionettes. In 1958, the Breakettes added the last of the, that's Bertha right there. In 1958, the Breakettes added the last of the great players of the golden era of softball, a 17-year-old rookie, future Hall of Famer, and one of the best to ever play the game, Joan Joyce. 15,000 fans crammed into the stadium for the 1958 World Championship Finals between the Fresno Rockets and the Breakettes. The Breakettes were the first to bring a title to the East with a 1-0 gem of a game. I thought you all would appreciate knowing that. This was perhaps one of the last games to draw the kind of great crowds that had been commonplace in the 1940s. For the record, all 3 girls and women's professional leagues, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, the National Girls Baseball League, and Larry Walker's National Softball Congress, folded in 1954, the year Walker retired the Queens. In 1965, the much feared and revered PBSW Ramblers closed up shop after a 33-year run. Dot, a 3-time world champion and record-setting 19-time All-American, was on board for every bit of it. A small item appeared in the Arizona Republic on December 11, 1965. The headline read, "Ramblers say adios to softball." The story was written by longtime sports editor Frank Gianelli. Ramblers, PBSW, 33, passed away Thursday of natural causes, survived by hundreds of daughters and a few friends. Internment already completed at Rambler Field, RIP. "It was time to quit," Dot was quoted as saying. "I'd rather have fans remember me as I was than watch me decline and say I knew her when she was good." Dot and her one-time arch rival, Ricky Cato, started a relationship not long after Kay Rohr passed away. They remained a couple for 48 years until Ricky's death in 2011. Dot came out in Ricky's obituary. Dot Wilkinson passed away March 18, 2023. She was 101. She is a member of both the National Softball and the National Bowling Halls of Fame, the first woman to be inducted into the Arizona Hall of Fame, and according to the Arizona Republic, the greatest female athlete in Arizona history. In 1960, Sports Illustrated called her the female Yogi Berra. If she were here, Dot would tell you Yogi should have been dubbed the male Dot Wilkinson.
Wow. That has to be the most detailed presentation we have ever had here in Northern New England, Lynn.
Well, you guys
That's
are
amazing.
researchers. I had to bring my A game.
You brought the A game and then some. That was incredible. What a life,
What a life.
Dot Wilkinson led.
What a life. Dot was family to me. I was with her when she passed. That last section always gets me.
Oh, wow.
And it's hard for me to watch her live anymore. She was 92 when we recorded those snippets in front of a live audience. And I did so because I realized Dot was the only one left. And pretty soon,
Oh, wow.
whatever she knew was going to be gone. And with it, all of that history would have been gone, because nobody kept very good records back then. It was
True.
dots to tell. A lot of the things you saw her say, you don't find on Google. You can't find that on the internet. And I was very grateful that she reluctantly agreed with me to sit down in front of a live audience at the Phoenix Public Library for 2 hours and talk and tell all the stories that she'd been telling me for years and years.
If you have a question for our presenter, Lynn Ames, tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button. Once you hit that, you'll see another button marked raise hand. Raise your hand and we will get you in line if anybody has questions tonight for our presenter, Lynn Ames. I'm interested in why. Was there another reason that softball declined the way that it did? Or was it simply that personnel retiring that just ceased the interest in it?
You know, Bruce, I asked that question of Dot more times than I care to tell you, because I too was baffled by it. And what Dot would say was, the deal was all the men came back from the war, right? They came back to work. They came back to play baseball. Baseball was in its ascendancy again. And television changed everything for them. More families were staying home and watching shows than they were going to the ballpark anymore. That had been such a family-oriented activity for so many years. And now they had other things to distract them. And so it was essentially that the world kind of moved on. And, Dot and Ricky had a conversation in 1965 on their way home from the last World Championships they played in Orlando, Florida, where they felt they'd gotten cheated out of a call and lost the game as a result. And they were really angry about it. And, they felt like the interest just wasn't as much anymore. The crowds were less interested. The players were distracted by more things in their lives. And, so they didn't necessarily feel like, they were fully committed to the game the way Dot and her cohorts had been in the 1930s and the 1940s, when the game was fresher and newer and the crowds were, fascinated by what they did. I mean, just imagine that crowd in Madison Square Garden, 12,500, 13,500 fans. It's just wild to even consider such a thing in Madison Square Garden. Except for maybe now when softball is rising again and women's sports is coming back, thank goodness. But, really, she didn't have a great answer for it, Bruce, except for the fact that people got distracted by other things and the world moved on.
I wonder what she would think about this fledgling women's professional baseball league that is being put together. I believe they start playing next year.
Yeah. I mean, Dot was always rooting for any girl who wanted to play, any woman who wanted to play. And Maybelle Blair is, I think, part of that movement to bring women's baseball back. And Maybelle and Dot were friends and certainly knew each other quite well. But I think she'd be all in favor. I mean, in her elderly years, she was very sharp all the way to the end, by the way, very, very sharp, and never used a wheelchair. I mean, Dot was still walking after all those years of catching. She was still walking around at 101.
Oh, God bless her.
She was a remarkable human being, truly. But she was always watching, college softball. She was watching professional baseball. She was watching the women play professional softball and the Olympics and all of that. She was there for all of it. And she absolutely would have been thrilled that there's another league coming into being to support this. The ascendancy of women's sports again would make her giddy right now, for sure.
It is marvelous to see the evolution of, and I'm probably going to misspeak, so I'm just going to say it, you can correct me. The evolution of the acceptance of professional women's sports since the movie A League of Their Own.
Mm-hmm.
That movie was, so loosely based on the league, and as for lack of better term, there was some stunt casting in it with Madonna and
Rosie O'Donnell, Regina Davis.
Yeah. where it was meant to appeal to the masses, but it really did its job in shining the spotlight on these fabulous, great athletes that actually played the game. And now to see that we have evolved to the point where, I mean, we have a huge professional women's soccer league. This professional women's baseball league has taken off. The professional women's hockey league has taken off, and they're
unrivaled. The basketball league, you know. I mean,
yep. Oh yeah, the WNBA. Geez, yeah. I mean, you watch some of those PWHL games, and they are banged out loud. It is incredible atmospheres taking place in those arenas, and I am hoping that it's not a fad.
I hope it's not a fad either. You know, I don't think it is. I don't think it is, because I think we are at a place where, you know, all of these things in some way or another, as you know, are driven by money. And now it's been discovered that there's money in women's sports, that you can bring in a crowd and you can bring in sponsors and all of these things, and you can fill stadiums again. And because of that, as long as it can be monetized, it will continue to succeed. But that's the key. It has to continue to be able to be monetized.
That's a good point.
So we'll see.
I look forward.
I wish I was 20 again and I could play.
I just wish I was 20 again.
No. Yes, no. I wish my body was 20 again.
There you go. That's
the
way I see
now,
it.
and the experience I have now, and the body I had at 20.
That's exactly it. There you go. I look forward to connecting you with the Women in Baseball Committee here with
awesome.
SABR. I think that it is an incredibly natural fit, of course, and I believe that you have an awful lot to offer them, and I believe they have an awful lot to offer you. And I think Ryan Woodard is on this call, who is highly involved with the IWBC and the committee. Ryan, can you pop in for a second here, my guy? Are you able to do that? He may or may not be able to do that, and that's okay. He was chatting earlier. That's okay. We will we'll move.
You'll find him sooner or later.
Yep. I'll get you introduced to everybody as moving forward, because I've got some work to do for you tomorrow.
I think I love you, Bruce.
To get you going.
Don't take it personally.
Hey, my wife's on this call.
I know. That's why I said don't take it personally.
All right, folks, we are back Monday, April 21st at 7 Eastern with Gregory Duhamel discussing his book, Clinton Oval, a Lost Mill City Ballpark. This is a rescheduled meeting from a few weeks ago when he couldn't make it, so I hope everybody's going to come out. This is a very local presentation, and it's really very interesting, so I think you're going to want to come out and see this no matter where you are. The links to sign up are in the SABR events calendar at sabr.org/events, and the meeting booklet distributed in each Monday message newsletter. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you are not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to sabr.org today. Lynn Ames, that was awesome. Thank you.
So grateful for you guys being here. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the invite, Bruce. I'm going to thank my buddy Leonard Cohen when I talk to him next. I appreciate the shout out. Anytime I get to talk about Dot, it's a good day.
And we appreciate you doing it. So thank you very much.
You bet.
Really, thanks a lot. All right, let's get everybody out of here. We'll see you next Monday. Oh, by the way, Wednesday night, the Elysian Fields chapter has Jerry Eisenberg scheduled. If you want to go to a presentation of baseball stories, I suggest you get back to that SABR events calendar and sign up for Jerry Eisenberg's meeting with Elysian Fields on Wednesday. That will also be at 7 o'clock. I and Molly are going to be in attendance, and I hope I'm going to see a lot of you guys there. So we'll see you Wednesday night, hopefully. If not, we'll see you next Monday. Let's get everybody out of here. Have a good night, folks.
Bye.